Tonight, I want to revisit a couple of thoughts on when your fears scare you. When your fears scare you. In Psalm 34 and verse 4, David said this, "I sought the Lord, and he heard me, and he delivered me from all my fears." I sought the Lord, and he heard me, and he delivered me from all my fears. That's a verse that's pretty well known and documented in the Old Testament, that people have wrapped their arms around in very profound ways. But one of the things that really helps cause this particular passage to come alive is when you begin to realize the context of when David said that. And what you have in the Psalms is David journaling his emotions. And many times, just when he journals his emotions, it's life-giving. You know, Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." That was him journaling just about a day, taking care of sheep. But in Psalm 34, we get the emotions, but we don't get the context. But if you go back to 1 Samuel chapter 21 and verse 10, you'll find the context. And the context has to do with the fact that God had told David he's going to be the next king of Israel. Well, that was a good moment in David's life. The problem was it was a bad moment in King Saul's life because no one likes being replaced. And so King Saul's not happy about being replaced, and so he goes on a mission to try to kill David. So imagine that the most powerful person in that particular nation is now coming after you, and David's running from his life. He doesn't have any resources. When he was told that he would be king, he was 17 years of age. And as he's being told that, it's going to be a journey of 13 years of him running for his life before he becomes king. Now, he feels at this particular time that he's cornered, that he doesn't have any options, and so he starts looking for something to do. And so he comes up with this idea that he is going to go to the king of Achish of Gath. And when he goes there, that maybe he could find some help. But the problem is if you do much Googling of Old Testament, what you know is that, you know, the king of Gath was the hometown of a man named Goliath. Now, how many of you ever heard the story of David and Goliath? You ever heard it before? Okay. Remember the big guy, the little guy, big guy insulting little guy, not being moved by it, big guy ends up dying and everything. Well, this is the big guy's hometown. But it's not only his hometown, but remember when David went out to battle, he had 5 smooth stones, and that's because Goliath had 4 brothers. So he not only ended up taking down Goliath, but he took down the whole family. And so what happens is that David is dealing with this torment of Saul because he's afraid, and what happens is he ends up going to Gath, and there's King Achish. Now, the thing about that is that it's such an evident story. Fear will drive you to do crazy things. There is just no reason David would do what he did. There's just no reason. Why would you, in a moment of desperation, decide that going to Goliath's hometown, going to Goliath's hometown of his brothers, and going there and thinking that they're going to help you? There's just nothing. Someone says, well, that's crazy. That's the whole point. That's what fear does. Fear drives you to do crazy things. And so people do that all the time. You know, people are afraid that they're going to be alone their whole life, and so they get in a relationship with someone that they know they shouldn't be in, and then they get in that relationship and they suffer forever people get afraid and they think, well, my life's never going to be positive, and they'll do something negative. And we all know that fear will drive you to do things that you know better than to do. And so when David ends up getting to this particular locale, it hits him. He's just done crazy. I mean, crazy is happening. But what David does is he plays the role. And he begins to drool, and he begins to spit, and he begins to act like, he's a crazy person. He begins to roll in the ground, because back then, the theory was that if you ever harmed someone who was crazy, their craziness came on you. And so Achish looked at his people and said, man, I can't do anything about this. I'm not going to hurt this guy, because if I hurt him, I'm going to end up literally having that craziness come on me. Now, that's the background. So when David says in Psalm 34 and verse 3, I sought the Lord and he heard me, and he delivered me from all my fears. Not one fear, but all his fears. So what were David's fears? Well, first of all, he was afraid that King Saul was going to get him. But then he was afraid that Achish was going to get him. And then he was afraid that everyone in the city would do something to him. He had a whole plethora of fears that were around him. And he said, I sought the Lord, and he heard me, and he delivered me from all my fears. But the thing that you need to see is that weaved in here, David begins to give you the spiritual antidote to fear when fear is driving you crazy. And he begins to give that to you. And he starts in verse 1, and he says, and I will bless the Lord at all times. He didn't say I'm going to bless the Lord one time. He said at all times. He didn't say I'm going to bless the Lord a couple of times, but he said I will bless the Lord at all times. Now, here's the thing that you have to understand. When David's journaling this, he's still being chased by Saul. There's nothing about his life that has changed. There's nothing. And I get it, because we want to inspire people, but I've literally been in services where someone said, we need to bless the Lord at all times. We just really, really need to bless him at all times. But usually what people are talking about is after they get the report that the cancer's not over there anymore, and they say, oh, we need to bless the Lord, or after you get the job, or after something happens. But this isn't the conclusion of the problem. He's still in the middle of the problem. And this is the first antidote. Can you bless God when it doesn't look like he's blessing you? That's the first thing. He says, if you want to deal with fear, then you're going to have to learn to bless God when it doesn't look like he's blessing you. There was nothing about this story that looked like David's being blessed. He's literally living on the run. He's literally living in dark caves. He's literally scrounging for everything that he can find to stay alive. He doesn't have anybody really on his side. He doesn't have resources. He doesn't have an army. He doesn't have anything other than that God said, I'm going to make you king. And now he's put himself where his fears have driven him crazy, and he's done something that's absolutely stupid, absolutely crazy. We've all seen it. We've all played the part where we've seen someone we love do something. We said, well, what were you thinking when you did that? Fear doesn't make you think, it makes you crazy. Why did you think that being at that place was going to be helpful? Didn't you know that you were going to get in trouble if someone found out? Fear doesn't make you think, it makes you crazy. Well, when you did that, did you ever consider the consequences of that? Fear doesn't make you think, it makes you crazy. And so we've had that conversation. I can't believe that I was that dumb. No, you just believe that you were that afraid, usually. because fear will drive you crazy. But see, the first principle is, can you bless God when it looks like God's not blessing you? And that's why so many people who say, well, I go to church and I worship and everything and I do things, and it doesn't seem to be a breakthrough to them because they think you do this after it's all over, but you do it when you're in the middle of it, because when fear's driving you crazy, bless God even if it looks like you will never be blessed. And so let me ask you some questions. Can you bless God when it seems like God has forgotten you? Can you bless God when it seems like God's forgotten you? I mean, don't you imagine that David was looking up to heaven and saying, God, I wasn't even invited to the inauguration when you chose who the next king was. My dad had to go get me and bring me back because no one thought I was it. And now I'm running for my life. I'm in danger every day. I'm one moment away from being killed. I'm one moment away from my whole life being over. And it all started because God said something. David wasn't praying to be king. And so can you bless God when it seems like God's forgotten you? How about this? Can you bless God when it seems like God no longer cares for you? Well, God, for this thing to be that messy, for this thing to be that problematic, it just doesn't seem like you care at all. It just doesn't seem like you care. The disciples were in a boat in Mark chapter 4. They're in the middle of a storm, and Jesus has preached all day, and he's doing what every pastor does after they've preached all day. He's taking a nap. And so he's literally in the boat taking a nap when the storm comes, and things get out of control, and their first words when they woke him up was, "Don't you care?" Now, there's several things I'd like to point out to you. You can be in a storm and Jesus can be on your boat. You can be in a storm and Jesus is on your boat. I mean, he was on the boat with them when the storm was happening. People say, well, you know, God just wasn't there for me. It defies what the Bible says. Time and time again, people were in trouble and Jesus was right there. So can you bless God when it seems like God's quit caring about you? How about this? Can you bless God when nothing seems to be working? This isn't working. This Christianity thing, this Jehovah thing, this faith thing, this Jesus thing, it's not working. Can you bless God when it looks like, boy, I've heard people talk about this, but now that I'm in it, it just doesn't work? How about this? Can you bless God when it feels like faith has failed you? Well, I tried believing. Can you bless God when it just feels like faith has failed you? And how about this? Can you bless God when it seems like what God says is too impossible for it to ever happen? There was nothing about David's life at this moment that spoke of him being king. So when we read stories, sometimes those stories get sort of Christianized because we make, God got me through this, and I've just learned to bless God at all times, and I was dealing with this, but God did this, and I bless God. Right now, nothing has happened. And so in your life, can you bless God at all times? Can you bless God when it seems like He's forgotten you? Can you bless God when it seems like He doesn't care about you? Can you bless God when nothing's working? Can you bless God when your faith feels like you failed? And can you bless God when it seems like what God Himself said is impossible? Welcome to grown-up faith. Welcome to the big leagues. So in your life, I will bless the Lord at all times. God, seems like you've forgotten me, but I'm going to bless you. God, it seems like this is never going to work, but I'm going to bless you. God, it seems like you've just totally forgotten me, but I'm going to bless you. God, I've done my best to believe, but Lord, doesn't seem to be doing anything, but I'm going to bless you. And Lord, the very things that you said, I didn't ask you to say them, but the very things that you said, they seem impossible. I'm going to bless you. See, somehow we filter verses to just be about good days. I will bless the Lord at all times. But sometimes it's the gut-wrenching days you have to bless God. That it is the gut-wrenching day that you have to bless God. So David says, I'll bless the Lord at all times. If I were to ask a show of hands, but I'm not doing that. But if I were to ask this question, how many of you have a reason right now in life not to bless God? Now, with that being true, can you bless God? Can you bless God? The Bible's an interesting book because it's raw and it's authentic. I will bless the Lord at all time, and His praise shall continually be in my mouth. And all of the glory, it's yours. You get glory on the worst day of my life. You get glory on the day I feel like my life is falling apart. You get glory on the moment that I feel like everything's against me. All of the glory. Now that's the first of 5 steps to handling fear. Come back next week. We'll inch you forward so that your fear doesn't scare you.